Welcome to my weekly reading recap for the first full week of February. I managed to finish reading 4 books, which is a pretty typical week for me. It was a pretty eclectic mix, but I really enjoyed them for the most part. My favorite book this week was True Biz by Sara Nović. So this is set at the River Valley School for the Deaf, where students just want to be like normal teens. They just want to hook up and pass their exams, and they would love it if politicians, doctors, and their parents would stop telling them what to do with their bodies. We follow 3 main characters. February, the headmistress of the school, who is just trying to keep the school funded and open. She's also struggling in her marriage. And then we follow 2 students as well. Charlie, she is new to the school. She's never met another deaf person before, and so she's being immersed in deaf culture for the first time in her life. She's also going through some troubles at home. Her parents are getting divorced, so she's going through a lot of rebellious antics. And then we also follow the school golden boy, Austin, who his baby sister was just born hearing, and that is a shock to his deaf family. This book was such a phenomenal story. I was so gripped by it. There was never any point in the book where I was like, oh, I really would love to get back to a different character. I thought they were both all so well-rounded, so interesting. I was so heavily invested in their story. I had so many emotions throughout this book. There were times where I was so angry at the injustices that these poor kids were having to go through. I was so invested in February's story, and just overall, I just had so many emotions reading this book. It was so fantastic. Something else that I really liked about this book is that between chapters, you get so much about deaf history and culture and so many just random facts. For instance, I knew that like British Sign Language and American Sign Language were both very different, but I didn't realize that American Sign Language and French Sign Language were pretty similar based on the history of how like sign language was brought over to the US. And so there were so many fascinating bits of information in there. I did listen to this one on audio, but if you can read the print one, I would recommend reading that one because it includes actual signs in the book, and I think that just sounds really interesting. But overall, I thought this was such a fascinating book. It was so interesting, and the characters of this one, every single character was just so well done, so complex, and I just was so invested in this book. The biggest book I read this week, and that is when I started the previous week, is The Fragile Threads of Power by V.E. Schwab. This is a sequel series to the Shades of Magic series. I read the Shades of Magic series for the first time last year, so I really love the world and the characters, and I was so excited to be back in this world and see a lot of familiar faces. It's been 7 years since the events in the original trilogy, and the 3 Londons are about to be drawn together again based on some dangerous discoveries by 3 different magicians. So we follow Kosika. She is the child queen of White London. A lot of dangerous stuff going on there. Of course, we follow Delilah Bard. It was so fantastic to see Lila again, to see a bunch of familiar faces. She had a ton of adventures. However, an old favor is calling her back for some stuff that's going on. And then we follow another new character, Tess, who has a special gift, and she's been hiding out in Red London. She's probably my favorite new character. I found myself really looking forward to her chapters. I also, of course, really loved Lila's chapters. I love getting to see all of the old faces again, catching up with them, seeing where they are after all this time. I had a little bit of a harder time getting into Kosika's story. It seemed like that was pretty separate, but I feel like this novel is really building towards what's going to happen in the next one, and I'm definitely going to continue to read this series because I love these characters and I love this world, and it was so much fun being back. The past few weeks have been a little bit stressful with everything going on, and so I wanted to do a comfort reread, and I was trying to think of what I really wanted to reread, and then I kept getting a bunch of comments on my book talk about a video that I did maybe when I first launched my book talk. It's been like 2 years or something like that, and it was Heist Society by Ali Carter, and I was like, I have not read that one in a while. Let me pick that one up. If you've never heard of it, it's a YA thriller about a group of teenagers who steal back paintings that were originally stolen by the Nazis and try to bring them back to their original families. Kat is from a notorious family of thieves. She's been involved her whole life, but when she's 15, she decides to pull a con of her own and she decides to get herself into an exclusive boarding school. Everything's going really well. Then someone sets her up and gets her expelled. Turns out it's her long lost friend, Hale, who's like, hey, your dad's in trouble. This guy thinks her dad stole a bunch of paintings, but turns out her dad couldn't have stolen those paintings because he was off doing something else. And now Interpol's watching him like a hawk, so he can't go and recover them, so it's up to her to help save her dad, and she formulates a heist team and they have to steal back these paintings. A lot of old Ally Carter books are very nostalgic for me. I usually like to say they're my equivalent of like what Harry Potter is to a lot of other people, so they have a very special place in my heart. Gallagher Girls is probably my favorite series by her, but I do like Heist Society as well. It was originally written in, I think, maybe 2010, so there is a little bit of like not like Other Girls going on that was very typical of YA back then, but it was a really fun story overall, and it was nice to just think back to the not so recent past when we all collectively thought Nazis were the bad guys. So fun times. And the last book I read was The Dead Cattail Assassins by P. Djèlí Clark. This is my very first book by that author, and I've heard so many great things. I did have a fun time, but this was a bit of a shorter novel. So this one follows Aveen. She is part of a group of assassins who've all had their memories wiped, and they've committed to 3 particular vows. 1, the contract must be just. 2, they can only target the person who they are contracted to unalive. And number 3, once they accept a contract, they have to carry it out. The story takes place over the festival of the Clockwork King, where the city goes upside down and mayhem breaks out, and Aveen is forced to come face to face with someone from her past who she shouldn't remember. This was a very fast-paced, I think it's a novella. It's very short. I loved the voice and the humor. I thought they were both really fantastic. I also love that the protagonist was in her 30s. So often it's like a teenager or someone who's in their 20s. So that was very refreshing, and I really liked all of that. But it almost was like a little bit too fast for me. I have a problem with novellas. I want to love novellas, right? They're just really easy to fit in, but I just find myself always wanting more, and I struggle to get really invested just because we don't get to spend as much time with them as with a full novel. So I didn't find myself quite as invested in the characters, but I did really love the voice and the humor in this one. And again, it just was such a quick, fun read. As for what's on my TBR this week, I'm currently listening to the audiobook of Children of Blood and Bone. I have been wanting to read this series for so long, and I'm finally getting around to it, and I'm loving it so far. As for my physical book, I'm currently reading The Kingdom of Copper, and this is a very thick book, so I don't expect that I will get to read any other physical books this week. As far as other audios, I also have Heavenly Tyrant by Shirin J. Zhao, and that's another really long one, so I don't expect that I will get more than that in, but we'll see.